of Utah's population will be over age 60 by the year 2030, an increase of 29% from 2012. This is a critical public health issue that we must address now. And in response to the recent rise in reports of elder abuse, Utah has taken immediate action by strengthening the foundation of our laws and regulations to support elderly victims of maltreatment. The state of Utah has a mandatory reporting law that mandates any person who has reason to believe that a vulnerable adult is being abused, neglected, or exploited must immediately notify Adult Protective Services or the nearest law enforcement office. But elder abuse tends to take place where the person lives, where their abusers are often trusted caregivers like adult children or a spouse or partner. In Utah, financial exploitation is the highest allegation investigated, followed by caretaker neglect. And even with mandatory reporting laws, elder abuse is believed to be an underreported crime. Some older victims are unable to report their victimization because of cognitive impairments, and others are reluctant to report their maltreatment due to fear of retaliation or feelings of self-blame and shame. And so it is up to all of us to protect our aging population and report if we suspect that any vulnerable adult has been the subject of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Today's conference will go a long way in teaching us more about elder abuse, like how to identify it and how to report it. It's no coincidence that today marks the 15th annual World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. I want to thank Utah's Division of Aging and Adult Services, AARP Utah, Utah Commission on Aging, the Alzheimer's Association Utah Chapter, Utah 211, and Utah's Association of Area Agencies on Aging for recognizing the importance of taking action to raise awareness, prevent, address elder abuse by hosting this event today. And so it is with great pleasure that I, Governor Spencer Cox of the state of Utah, do hereby proclaim June 15th, 2021 as World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in Utah and encourage all of our communities to recognize and celebrate older adults and their ongoing contributions to the success and vitality of our country. Thank you.
Awesome. We really appreciate Governor Cox, who has demonstrated his commitment to this important issue, both in his role currently as governor, but also for many years as lieutenant governor, has really worked incredibly hard to recognize seniors and to ensure and help them in their safety and well-being and health throughout the state. So we appreciate his words today. We have a number of presenters. We're going to have a keynote speaker, but following our keynote, there are several different sessions that people can choose to listen to. It's hopefully these will be recorded because there are so many good ones. You're going to want to attend more than one of these. There is a presentation by Stanley Nez on the traditional home teachings of compassion, dignity, and respect. There is a What to Know About LGBTQ+ Seniors from Deb Hall at the Utah Pride Center. Resources for Service Providers by Nick Whitaker from Utah 211. Stopping Senior Scams from Doug Shadell, who is the State Director of AARP Washington. Taking Care of Yourself While Taking Care of Those with Dementia, presented by Raven Albertson from the Utah Association, or Alzheimer's Association Utah chapter. And then Alan Ormsby from AARP Utah is going to be talking about advanced directives and advanced care planning. And finally, Lori Giovanoni is going to be letting us in on the secrets of resilient people. So again, lots of topics to choose from, great stuff there. And I look forward to those breakout sessions and hope you'll take advantage of those. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Paul Greenwood will be speaking to us on the hidden crime of elder abuse. Many of us have had the great pleasure of hearing Paul present at various in-person and online events. Paul is the retired Deputy District Attorney of San Diego County's Attorney General's Office. He practiced for 40 years and was the head of the Elder Abuse Prosecution Unit. He's been involved in over 700 felony cases of elder and dependent abuse. I think involved in resolving those, not in committing those. He's been featured on CBS's Eye on America and NBC's Nightly News, and has received so many awards for advocacy and collaboration and innovation, and all of the important work that he has really been the model for in working to end elder abuse across the nation, but particularly in his specific area. He is a dynamic and interesting speaker. If you haven't heard him before, you're in for a treat. If you have, of course, you know what a wonderful perspective, and an enthusiastic advocate for seniors and older adults and vulnerable people. And he has graciously joined us today from his home in San Diego, which wouldn't it be great if we were all in San Diego today, but we're glad he's here with us virtually. So I will turn the time over to Paul Greenwood.
Well, thank you so much, Nels, for welcoming us to this event. And let me just share my screen now with you all. And I want to welcome you all to, as Nelson said, the 15th Annual World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. A special thanks to Governor Cox for leading us. Isn't it just inspirational to hear from a state governor about the importance of this day in the life of Utah citizens? And also a special thanks to the team that has put this conference together, to Tracy Lee, the program administrator, to her team, and to Rob, who's organizing all the technical issues behind the scenes. So thank you all. So what I want to focus on for the next 45 minutes or so is trying to think ways that we can bring this insidious crime out of the shadows, and so that we no longer have the forgotten victims. So again, this is Utah Elder Abuse Awareness Day, and I want to again echo my thanks to all the sponsors for this event today. And a particular shout out to my friends at AARP. I've been a proud member of AARP for, gosh, 19 years now, so you can guess my age. And now they call me an ambassador for AARP. And I'm so glad you've got somebody from Washington State who's a really an expert on scams, Doug Shadell, to lead one of the breakout sessions. So I hope you'll have a chance to watch that later on today or in the coming days. So I call myself still a newly retired prosecutor, even though it's been just over 3 years since I left that great office in San Diego. But I still think of myself in that role. And one of the reasons is because it's embedded in me this desire to make sure that we do not forget victims of elder abuse. We need to put this crime very much in the spotlight. And one of the advantages that having retired from my day job has enabled me to focus on getting this message out to a wider audience so that we can all be part of the solution and not be part of the problem. Because one thing I've clearly learned over the years that I was privileged to be in the courtroom was this: it takes all of us, not just social workers, not just law enforcement, not just prosecutors, not just the governor. It takes every single one of us on this webinar today to help keep our older adults safe in their communities. Just a little bit more about my own background for those of you who've not heard me speak before. As you can probably tell, I'm not exactly a classic San Diego, Southern California dude. Originally from the south of England, where I trained as a lawyer and went to law school there in the north of England. And then I ended up becoming what is called a solicitor. I tried the barrister gig, but wearing that white wig and the black gown just didn't suit me. So I ended up being a general practitioner called a solicitor for 13 years. So how did I end up in San Diego? Well, it was all about true love. I had the great fortune to be traveling in August of 1973 through the United States. And I ended up in San Diego at the end of August for 2 whole days, a Saturday and a Sunday. And on the Sunday morning, I walked into a Baptist church in San Diego and looked around the room, and the only empty seat was sitting next to this gorgeous young lady. And literally I sat down next to her. Yeah, I married her, but not in the same service. That was 5 years later. And she is indeed the love of my life. And so after 13 years of practice in England, we decided that we needed to get Sue back to her hometown of San Diego. So we arrived here in 1991. We had a daughter age 10, a son age 4. I was jobless, unqualified. So what did I have to do? I had to go sit that dreaded California bar exam with 1,000 other people. And thankfully, I was able to convince the bar examiners that I knew more than I really did, and they gave me a pass. So I was able to get sworn in at the end of November of 1991 as an attorney. I spent 2 years with a civil law firm, but didn't really enjoy it very much because my whole passion has always been in the courtroom, and I've only been intrigued by one aspect of the law, and that's criminal law. I think it all started when I was about 9 years of age, when my parents let me stay up on a Saturday night with a black and white TV to watch Perry Mason. And so I applied to the San Diego DA's office in 1993, and thankfully they took a risk. They decided that I should be the first ever green card holder that they could hire as a prosecutor. And I'm so glad they did. Obviously, since then, I've become a very proud citizen of this fantastic country. But at that time, I was a green carder. So I joined the DA's office, and that became my career for the next 25 years. And one of the reasons I've loved being part of that office is it's known for its innovation. And one of the great projects we started was having in court support dogs to accompany vulnerable victims to court, young children, children of molests, of child abuse. And then we applied it to vulnerable victims, people with autism, people with cerebral palsy, and then older adults with the early stages of dementia and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And this became a phenomenal program, and one which I hope can be replicated throughout the whole country. We also learned one thing when we started to focus on older adults. We realized we needed to give them a space, a quiet haven in which to sit and watch their favorite soap operas. You know, it's okay to get subpoenas out to bring seniors to court, as long as you can tell them, don't worry, you won't miss your favorite program. So we built an office, a waiting area just for our older adults to sit in comfort. So they put me in the family protection in the district attorney's office in January of 1996. So why on earth would I leave the office? And I can honestly tell you, because for 25 years, not one day did I ever wake up thinking, I don't want to do this. So the decision to retire was pretty much based upon numbers. You see, I had just gone through my 25th year work anniversary in March of 2018. And I looked at that number and I thought, yeah, that looks like a cool number. Maybe this is a good time to depart. Also, this number impacted my life. I had just turned 66 in March of 2018, and I discovered a wonderful thing, which is if you're in full-time employment and you're 66 in America, you can apply for something called Social Security. So you know what my favorite day of the month is? The third Wednesday of every month. It actually works. And when I added in my Social Security to my county pension, it seemed to make sense. But you know, for those of you younger people on this call, I just want to warn you that things do change when you're in your 60s. For example, if you turn back the years and you look at the difference between what happened 40 years ago and now, you can see that things have changed. And a lot of what is said in this slide is very true. And some of you can relate to it. I know I can. So there we are. So this is what you have to look forward to. And then this number impacted my decision to quit the office. No, this is not my county pension, okay? This was a headline that was out there in 2018 in Bloomberg Press. And when I saw this, I questioned it. And I called up Nick Lieber, the journalist, and I said, Nick, where did you get this number from? How can we rely on this? Because I always thought it was $3 billion. He said, well, actually, based upon a study from 3 years earlier, TrueLink put it out. They estimated it at $36.5 billion. But he says, I think it's still too conservative. One of the problems is, ladies and gentlemen, is that none of us really know how much is being lost, because so often the victims do not report that they are a victim of this insidious crime. But it was also consistent with what I was seeing in early 2018. I was getting calls from all over the country, from different jurisdictions, whether it be from adult protective services, from law enforcement, from other prosecutors, and they were all saying the same thing. Mr. Greenwood, we are seeing a huge uptick in the number of reported suspected cases of elder abuse. We've heard about your program in San Diego. Could you come out for 24 hours to our jurisdiction and give us a bit of an insight into what we can do? And I really felt the time had come for me to pass the baton and to share the lessons that I've learned with a wider audience. And so today is a wonderful opportunity for me to do that with you. So for 22 years of the 25 years, I was involved in unraveling cases such as some of these that you see here on this slide. Not just financial elder abuse, but there was a lot of physical abuse and neglect as well. This number also impacted my decision to leave the office because my wife and I were about to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary in 2018, coming up for 43 now. And so we decided as a gift to each other, we needed to spend more time together. Now, little did we know in 2018 that the pandemic was coming. And boy, have we been able to spend more time together in this last 15 months. It's been terrific. So my journey on this venture of pursuing justice for older adults began in January of 1996. The call came in from the elected prosecutor in our office, the boss, as we call him. And, you know, isn't it funny when you get a call from the boss, you always think you've done something wrong. I don't know why that is, but it's just human nature. And I walked into his office and I could tell he was upset. He said, I've just had a very troubling phone call from Adult Protective Services. I said, who are they? He says, I don't know, but I know they're upset. I said, what about? He said, apparently our office and law enforcement in general are ignoring a huge escalating problem called elder abuse. I said, what's that? He said, I do not know, but you're about to find out because I've just named you as the first head of the first ever created elder abuse prosecution unit. And that was it. That was my assignment. And typically in our office, any assignment that you are given lasts for 3 to 5 years maximum. And then they move you on to another area of prosecution. Well, not for me. This became my assignment for the next 22 years. And people all along the way have asked me, why? Why did you stay in that area for so long? Didn't you want to do something else after a few years? And my answer was always the same, no. I found something that I became very passionate about and still am. And primarily the two reasons that made me this way were these two people. This is a picture of my late parents. Sadly, I lost my father, age 92, in 2014 to advanced Alzheimer's. And many of you on this webinar today, unfortunately, experienced through a family member, somebody who is suffering from some form of dementia, possibly Alzheimer's itself. And it's a very cruel disease, and it's very cruel, particularly on the caregiver, on the loved one, on the partner who is seeing this every single day. Eventually, we persuaded my mother that the best place for father to be in was in a caring Alzheimer's facility. And so for the last 6 years of his life, that's where he lived. But sadly, he lost the ability to speak. And towards the end, it became inevitable that this was going to be the way he would pass away. But I don't think of him as an Alzheimer's victim. I think of him as a true hero, because I learned at the age of 7 that my dad had become a hero. He was a B-25 bomber pilot in World War II, and he survived 79 bombing missions. And on 78 of them, he landed perfectly. But on mission number 6, on June the 4th, 1944, it all went wrong. He was hit out of the skies by fighter enemy aircraft, ditched into the Adriatic, and almost drowned. Thankfully, he managed with his last breath to unlock the fuselage cockpit canopy, and he floated to the surface from 50 feet under and was rescued by Yugoslav fishermen. And then there's my mother, who died in November of 2019, aged 96. Classy lady, loved the finer things of life, the best English high school teacher I've ever seen in my life, a brilliant communicator, the only person who can actually keep the attention of teenage boys when teaching Shakespeare and Dickens, and also the best scone baker in the world. I believe, as many of you do, that this is our finest generation, but the sad part is we are losing them at an alarming rate. And within a very few years, there'll be nobody left of that generation. So it's time to pause, it's time to reflect. And whenever we meet somebody from that generation, it is time for us to pay our respects and thank them for all the sacrifices that they gave up for us. So back in '96, they gave me obviously all the tools for a prosecutor, right? Everything you need except one thing. Nobody was bringing me any cases. That is very unusual. Why not? All I had to deal with was silence. This poster, which I borrowed from Illinois, became my motivating factor for the next 22 years. And I can honestly say that every morning on the way to work, I would pause and ask myself this question: what can I do today to help break through the silence? And I hope that you will ask yourself that question at some point today as well, because we all, again, need to be part of the solution. There's too much silence. We need to bring this subject out into the open, not just on June the 15th, but on every other day. The Attorney General for Kansas has called elder abuse the silent epidemic of our time, and it does indeed too often operate in the shadows. I've seen that time and time again, and were it not for the vigilance of a neighbor, of a bank teller, of a police officer, of a social worker, many of the crimes that I prosecuted would have remained in the shadows and the perpetrators would have got away with it. So how do we go about breaking through this barrier of silence? I started to learn in 1996, because bear in mind that I knew nothing about this crime, and that was why I had said to my boss, what is it? And I started to learn that it was indeed a crime that was going unpunished. But as I started to hear story after story, there were so many consistent red flags to make it so predictable. And so by the time I'd spent 15, 20 years doing these kinds of cases, it was almost that I could finish the story for the police officer who was telling me about a new case, because so often the pattern is evolving the same with each one. And unfortunately, the crime is not going away. It is getting worse. It is escalating, and it's escalating primarily because there are more and more people who are fitting into this category of older adults. You've heard this statistic. How many people will in America today turn 65? In one day, 10,000. June 15th, there will be 10,000 people turning 65. And within the next 14 years, there will be more people in this country over the age of 65 than there are children, for the first time ever in the history of this country, which should send alarm bells ringing throughout every legislature in this country. We're all living longer. And we finally have found out the success to long living. Do you know what it is? Eating Smuckers with your toast. If you have Smuckers, you will live to be 106. It's a known fact, or 104. Now, forgive the next slide, but this is my favorite centenarian, okay? Now, I'm not endorsing it, but this was a true story. She lived to be 103. She outlived 3 of her primary care physicians, all of whom begged her to stop smoking. Go figure. By the way, I really hope that some of you will use the chat room to register some questions. I'm hoping that by 10 to the hour, I can wrap this up and give you the opportunity to ask questions. So please go ahead and type your question into the chat box, and Jennifer will read them out for us at the end, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to respond to them. Yet despite what is obvious escalation of the demographics, this is the truth. This was a tweet from one arm of the federal government. It's called the Administration for Community Living, ACL. And look at what we're spending nationally on elder justice issues compared to other forms of family welfare. It's shocking. We need to implore our national and state representatives that more and more funding has to go into protecting the older population. If we do not do that, if we do not do it now, then unfortunately, we will be buried with cases. Now, looking at Utah, interesting enough, the criminal section for elder abuse very much parallels the one that I used for 22 years. And this is the code section that is where you will find the criminal definitions for elder abuse. And under that code section, interesting enough, again, just like California, you have two types of victims. You call them elder adults and dependent adults. And elder adult is anybody over the age of 65. And dependent adult is anyone with mental or physical impairments that restrict the ability of that person to carry out their normal activities of daily life or restrict their ability to protect their own rights. So it is important that when we talk about older adults, we never forget that there's also a category of dependent adults who also need the same protections and for whom we need to pursue justice. Again, other definition for dependent adults. So this whole area of elder abuse is exploding for the demographics, for the fact that Alzheimer's, which is only one portion of the whole category of dementia. There are over 5 million people today in America with Alzheimer's. The fact that victims are staying silent. The fact that the third fastest growth job in this country involves home care. The fact that unfortunately still we're doing minimal background checks on caregivers with a high temptation to steal and a low risk of getting caught, that all becomes a combination for escalating crimes. We've got to understand too, the fact that so many of our older adults are too afraid to come forward, to report. Many of them are too embarrassed to report because actually the perpetrator is somebody that they raised in their own family. Sometimes the fear is that by coming forward, government, and I use that term loosely, that government will take away our independence. I know this to be true because I would talk to so many victims in San Diego and ask them very gently, why didn't you say something? And that was always the reason they gave me. Mr. Greenwood, I would rather lose that money than run the risk of losing my independence. And sometimes the fear factor was strengthened by the threat of retaliation or the supposed threat of retaliation from the perpetrator. So when we say elder abuse, what behavior does that encompass? Under the Utah Code, it obviously includes physical abuse, slapping, hitting, pushing. And that's why we need to be able to differentiate between accidental and non-accidental injuries. You know, there were often times when I would show photographs of my injured victims to the defense attorneys, and the defense attorneys say, well, Mr. Greenwood, we all know that elderly people bruise easily. But that's when having an expert with you who can decipher the difference between non-accidental and accidental. And sometimes it's pretty obvious when it's non-accidental. And it's hard to explain away injuries like this. This, in fact, the rounded bruising was from the base of a beer bottle being shoved into his mother's eye. And then you look for the defensive wounds where the mother is blocking her blows from the perpetrator, or you look for the suspicious bruising on the neck. You know, the #1 suspect for physical abuse, not only in San Diego, but in the whole of the state of Utah. Do you know who it is? I'll show you. This is who it is. He's a son, and he lives in your jurisdiction. I guarantee it. Typically with a widowed mother, he's either divorced and come back, or he's single and never ever left home, or he just got released last night from local prison or jail. In almost every single case, and we're talking here in the hundreds now, of the sons that I've prosecuted over the 22 years, pretty much every single one of them was lazy and unemployed. And whenever I would talk to the mother, I would say, I see that your son living with you, he's 46, but he's not working. Why not? And the mother would always tell me, but Mr. Greenwood, he tells me he has a medical condition. I said, let me guess, he's got a bad back. How did you know? She says. I said, well, it comes from sitting on your sofa 8 hours a day playing video games. Now, I know you can accuse me of being a little cynical, but it's true. But sometimes these sons also were plagued with a history of mental illness. And even though I would prosecute those sons, I would treat them very differently and seek out not punishment in jail, but seek out treatment programs where they could be released to day programs to get help for their mental illness. You know, Tennessee has said it well. They said, what do you call someone who abuses an 8-year-old woman's son? And then there's emotional or mental abuse. And we all know of circumstances where words can really rip into the heart of an older adult. They can terrify and cause that older adult physical disability, could cause an uptick in blood pressure, conduct designed to threaten, to intimidate, to torment or harass. Anything like that can constitute emotional or mental abuse. The problem is that you can't document those types of things very easily, just like you can with physical abuse. So we've got to become more astute to recognize when it becomes emotional or mental abuse. And then the hidden subject of sexual abuse. We hate to think of older adults as being victims of sexual abuse, but it's happening. It's happening in Utah. It's happening in San Diego. And typically it happens in a long-term care facility. 4 years ago, CNN did a whole expose on the sick, the dying, and the raped. It really uncovered a lot of problems that was going on. And we need to take the blinkers off and be aware that this, unfortunately, is a sad statement, and it is going on in our long-term care facilities or in private residences in Utah. And so let's be on the lookout for telltale signs of sexual abuse. And then, as the governor said, neglect by a caregiver. Remember, he said that financial abuse was number 1, neglect by caregivers was number 2. That's in your statute. And what constitutes neglect? It's typically these times of factors, depriving the victim of medical attention or food, where there's a lack of hygiene, a lack of ventilation. And on a warm day in Utah like today, can you imagine an older adult being kept in an environment without proper through ventilation, without air conditioning? It can become almost torture. Sometimes where the caregiver will over-medicate in order to placate the patient, the client, so that they don't cause disruption. Or sometimes they remove the medication and actually take it for themselves. You end up with victims who are malnourished or semi-comatose or dehydrated. And typically the one area that gets most attention is when the victim ends up in the ER with stage 4 bed sores. When are these pressure sores avoidable? When is it criminal? You know, the medical field will look at pressure sores and stage them from 1 through 4, and 4 being the worst. And I would prosecute cases of neglect where there was at least a stage 3 or a stage 4 pressure sore, typically. And then the whole area of financial exploitation. In fact, 65% of all of the cases that I prosecuted involved some form of financial exploitation. You know, it's interesting that the US Center for Disease Control has now called elder financial exploitation a senior health hazard. And that is true. I have seen so many victims of financial exploitation having their health impacted by this crime. We are going to see, there's no doubt, an explosion of these cases. More and more people are trying to get their hands on the hard-earned life savings of Utah's older adults. And if you believe the headlines, then we are indeed in for a challenge. Just look at some of these. On the rise. On the rise again. Since the pandemic. So who are the usual suspects? Unlike the physical abuse profile of a son, it's a variety. And these are some of the many types of defendants that I've prosecuted. Not only family members or caregivers, but also professionals, realtors, attorneys, CPA, bookkeepers, financial advisors, insurance salesmen, and then bogus contractors and scam artists. Here's an example, a caregiver who stole over almost $600,000 from the elderly man that she was supposed to be caring for, and then she murdered him. This gentleman, a Pearl Harbor survivor who was neglected by his caregiver, who isolated him from his neighbors. And thankfully, the neighbors called law enforcement for a welfare check. And when he walked in and actually had to break the door down, he found the caregiver in the back of the house with all the money. And then just when you think your money is safe in a bank, look who's stealing the money. We were prosecuting this gal who was the manager of a Chase Bank in Imperial Beach, San Diego. Here was a contractor who was unlicensed in California and calling himself Father and Daughter's Christian Construction Company. Where would he put this flyer? In a church parking lot. Look at this guy. He pretended to be an FBI agent, used a fake badge, used a fake business card, pretending to be an FBI agent and convincing my victim that she needed to go to her bank and withdraw all her money because her money was being stolen from a bank teller. So what can we do to put a dent in this escalating crime? First of all, we've got to know the signs. We've got to look for anybody in our street, in our neighborhood, in our family, in our circle of friends who is being isolated from us. And I know the pandemic has enforced a lot of unnecessary isolation through no fault of anybody, but the perpetrators have used the pandemic to further alienate older adults from their families. So look out for a change with isolation. Look out for a new friend who suddenly pops up out of the woodwork, or a relative who hasn't been seen for years and years suddenly arriving on the doorstep. Look for changes in your friend or your family member's behavior or appearance. Look for examples of times of missed bill payments showing that there's financial irregularities. Look for a change in professional advisors. You've had a lawyer for 25 years and suddenly now there's a new estate planning attorney who's doing amendments to your living trust, red flag. And make it your duty to say something. In fact, I'm so pleased to see that Utah law makes it mandatory for everybody who's in Utah on this call today to be a mandated reporter. And the obligation is to do something immediately to either notify APS or your nearest law enforcement officer. Now, I've kind of changed this poster. This is not something from Utah, but I've added your phone number that you have. This is the statewide phone number, 1-800-371-7897, which is operating from 8 till 5 Monday to Friday. You know, one of the things I would love to see happen is get funding so that this could be a 24/7 phone number active, because my experience was that all the crimes occurred at 1 minute to 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. I don't know how it happened that way, but that's exactly human nature. So we need a 24/7 operating line in Utah. But if you can't do that, then you can go online. I'm so glad you've got this great, easy access form that all of you should be familiar with, so that if you suspect elder abuse, this is the form that you can fill out immediately and send it in. And if you are a victim, or if you know a victim, please, please eliminate there's such an incentive to feel embarrassed or to be afraid. Please try to dispel that. If you are the victim, understand that none of us are going to regard you as being anything less than a victim. You need to come forward. And if you're a friend of a victim, encourage them to come forward. There's this fear of being perceived to be in need of protection. It's false, but it's a fear that is genuine amongst a lot of victims. Try to eliminate that. Try to eliminate the embarrassment. We understand it. It's difficult to talk about a family member who has ripped us off or has physically hit us. Very difficult. But think about it in the long term. By coming forward, we're actually helping this family member to get the help that they sorely need. Fear that we might lose our independence. No, no. The only person we want to possibly get their independence lost is the perpetrator, not yours. Because if we say nothing, the truth is that the abuser will have a green light to carry on. You know, Alberta said it so well. They said, elder abuse thrives on silence. The time has come in Utah today to help bring this tragic secret out into the open. Something else we can all do. We can all get involved with the local multidisciplinary team. That is so important. You know, we've had several in San Diego. One of the most successful was what we called an Elder Protection Council. And we had 3 prongs: to raise awareness, enhance prevention, and improve protection. And boy, that was so helpful and illuminating to have professionals, retirees, older adults meeting together. Because I'm a great believer in this quote, because we can only do so much on our own, but together as a team, we can do so much more. You know, I love getting this picture out of Hawaii. If ever you've been to Hawaii, you've seen these people in the outrigger canoes, and you've been amazed, as I have, at the synchronization as they paddle through the waves. And when you're in time with one another, it's incredible the progress you can make. It's all about networking. You know, I believe in starting local, but thinking big picture. Start where you are, get involved in a MDT, build it together. And it's about the 3 C's. It's about collaboration, cooperation, and communication. So who should be on the team? I know you should be, but it's typically people like this: Adult Protective Services, ombudsman, guardians offices, police, prosecutors, first responders, medical personnel, victim advocates, bank tellers, federal agencies, resource agencies. But it also requires you, if you're a retiree, if you're a member of the public who's a volunteer, you can be of such vital importance too. You've got your ear to the ground. You can share information with the team. So many people need to be involved in this team approach. Before I retired from the DA's office, we created this blueprint, and I'll make this available. I'll send it to Tracy Lee, and if you want to request a copy, maybe she can download it to a particular website, but hopefully you can get hold of this as well, because this kind of embodies the teamwork approach that we wanted to emulate. One more thing that we can all do before I hopefully have some questions that we can be asking. Watch out for some fundamental misconceptions that often prevent cases from being investigated. You know, I had to battle against these misconceptions a lot during the 22 years. Misconception number 1 was that apparently you get to a certain age, such as 80 or 85, apparently you become a terrible, ineffective witness in the courtroom. That is absolutely false. But I've heard people say that time and time again, and they always recite the same common answer: oh, well, forgetfulness. No, no, no. I think the truth lies here. Age doesn't make us forgetful. It's having too many things to do makes us forgetful. So we've got to get rid of those stereotypes about what we think of somebody who's 85 or 90 or 95, because most of them are based upon misconception. Misconception number 2, if the victim refuses to provide information, I was being told, that's it, Greenwood, we're closing the investigation. I said, hold on. No, no, no. There's still something we should be doing, because we can still build a case, and we can let the prosecutor figure out a way to break through this barrier of silence. Don't let the victim dictate which cases get investigated, because we've learned from domestic violence, self-determination is not the answer. Number 3, if the victim gives the money, quote, voluntarily, they were always telling me, Greenwood, back off. It's not a crime. No. When people would tell me it's just a civil matter, that would get me a little bit frustrated. And I would say, hold on, you can't say that, because only a trained prosecutor who's prosecuted fraud cases can actually say that. You know, this headline appeared in Forbes magazine, and it kind of typifies the frustrations that there is, not only in Utah, but across the country amongst families who are frustrated that some law enforcement officials don't pursue these investigations because they fall into that misconception that it's, quote, just a civil matter. But I've learned over the years that things aren't always how they first appear. I mean, take this picture, for example. You go, well, what kind of bird is that? But take a look at it more closely. It's not a bird. It's actually a human being sitting on a tree stump with their hand over their head. Do you see that now? Now, don't ask me why they're doing this. I have no clue, but at least it gives me a teaching opportunity to say, yes, there are times when what appears on the surface to be consensual has in fact been diluted by fraud, lies, undue influence, or by taking advantage of the mental limitations of the victim. This case started out as theft of baby grand pianos. We had 19 victims, all older adults, who had consigned their pianos to a reputable business, a piano store in La Jolla. And yet over a 5-year period, not one of them ever had their pianos sold, not one of them ever got their money sent to them, and not one of them ever had that piano returned. So one of the victims did what I think is appropriate. They called up the police department and said, I'm a victim of theft of a piano. And what did the police say? They emailed back to the victim saying, it's all a civil issue. No, it's not. The only way I heard about this was through the media, because the victims did a smart thing. They went on TV and told their story. And so I talked to the TV reporter. He gave me all the names of the victims, and we put 38 felony charges together, 19 counts of embezzlement and 19 counts of elder financial exploitation. The final misconception: a power of attorney doesn't give you the excuse to go steal and plunder. You know, the power of attorney is a very sophisticated legal document in California and in Utah. And so I'm urging everyone to look at the circumstances surrounding how the power of attorney was created. Whose idea was it? Who witnessed it? Who notarized it? Are there any red flags that their victim did not understand what they were signing? And did the then power of attorney take full advantage of that? So as I wrap this up, the theme that I hope I'm getting across is that by doing all these things, by watching out for red flags, by understanding what we mean by acts of elder abuse, that hopefully we can reach victims. That's our goal. And the message that I have for Utah's older adults is one of respect, one of dignity and honor, and that we are all on this call, particularly those of you who have organized this webinar, that we are committed to seeking justice. And one thing I always used to do in a closing argument was try to summarize my case with 3 words that always began with the same letter. I like the letter P. My name's Paul. I used to be a prosecutor, okay? So the 3 Ps that I want to leave with you for the rest of the day are these: passion, purpose, and perseverance. I'm leaving up for a second my contact information. If you have any follow-up questions that we don't get to during this next few minutes, feel free to email me at paul@greenwoodlawcorp.com, or you can go to my website. And if you see any opportunities when we finally lift this restriction on meeting together, if you see a need for me to come to your jurisdiction, I would love to do that and spend a day giving some training and encouraging the key players to get more involved and put this insidious crime into the spotlight. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to throw it back and see if we have any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. I have a question actually to kind of kick things off. We do have some questions in the queue, but I would love to know, and this is Jennifer Terrazon from AARP Utah, I'll be moderating all those questions. If you suspect that somebody that you love or know is a victim of abuse, should you speak to them directly first? If so, kind of what are the questions that you should ask them, or should you just directly go to Adult Protective Services or to your local law enforcement?
A great question. First of all, I think you should be mindful of the fact that the law requires you to immediately report. So please do that. Make that call, because when you do speak to the victim may try to put some moral pressure on you not to say anything, not to report, and that will then make a conflict in your own mind. But certainly there's no harm in speaking gently, but I would always say the same thing. Please do not frown down on the behavior of the victim. Do not try to make them feel worse than they really are. Comfort them, support them. And if they do tell you any snippets of information that can identify the suspect, that can give you information away from that conversation, write that down. So inevitably you can then share that information with law enforcement and prosecutors while it's still fresh in your mind.
That's wonderful. That's very helpful. We had a question from someone who asked, what kind of an attorney should you reach out to regarding vulnerable adult abuse, especially when the abuse is caused by community mental health organizations? And they said that in their experience, probate attorneys haven't been able to help.
Well, if you believe that the conduct of which you're concerned from this mental health person in the community is, quote, criminal, then you start with a call to Adult Protective Services and a call to law enforcement. And reminding yourself of the misconceptions that I just shared. If you're being told it's just a civil matter and you believe it's not, quote, just a civil matter, then you need to write a letter to the police chief and with a copy to the prosecutor's office explaining your reasons why you do not think it's just a civil matter. Now, in addition, you should look on the Bar Association website for attorneys who are trained in specific types of qualifications, and there will be elder abuse civil litigators. There should be a list of those on your county bar website.
Great. We have another question, and this is kind of similar, and it's in regard to your question about financial abuse and giving away money. So someone has a client who is sending money to their family in Africa. It's part of the culture that they send money there to support their family. She's from Africa, and her husband is from the States, but she's getting behind in her rent for her assisted living. So is that something that's reportable? Is that a form of abuse? How should we kind of respond to those different instances?
Yeah, I mean, as long as we know that it's definitely being sent to, quote, family members back in Africa rather than to a suspect who's portraying themselves to be a family member. That's one concern I would have. But secondly, if there is a danger that by doing it, that there's a danger of eviction from the living conditions, I think certainly it's going to have to involve some kind of intervention. With the husband being involved, who sounds like he's from the United States, but also maybe involving a trained social worker who can intervene. So it's probably not, the focus is not on criminal behavior, but on simply getting the person back on track to understand that their priority is to their own family here, and then secondarily to their family back in Africa.
Sure. And I think we have time for one more question before we break out into our groups. And so one of the questions was, what do you do if you believe abuse is coming from an assisted living facility? And so somebody specifically kind of mentioned that the facility was supposed to contact family members about medication given to the mother, but they over-medicated her. And along those same lines, I guess I would ask, what do you look for in those assisted living facilities to make sure your family is safe?
Yes, I mean, choosing an assisted living facility for a loved one is one of the most important decisions we can ever make. And I always tell people, go at various times of the day, unannounced, to see what level of staffing there is for the facility. So go at night, go early morning, and also take a look into the eyes of other residents. Do they appear to be well cared for? Do they appear to be depressed, isolated? And then when it comes to actually concern that you've got for a resident who may be being over-medicated, you've got to find out who the ombudsman is for that assisted living facility. You need to talk to them. You also need to make a report immediately if you suspect that this over-medication is into the criminal arena of caregiver neglect, and then maybe contact also the Attorney General's office in Utah, who have a Medicaid fraud unit, and they do have specialist investigators who know their way around the rules for assisted living facilities far better than probably the local law enforcement police officer.
Okay, kind of along those same lines at an assisted living facility, what do you do if your parent or family member is giving cash gifts to workers at the assisted living facility?
Yes, that is a no-no because you're sending, unfortunately, wrong signals. It's unfair on the rest of the staff who are well-behaved and trained not to accept cash gifts from a resident. Certainly, the administrator needs to be told immediately. And even if you feel that the caregiver is not seeking or soliciting the cash, nevertheless, they know that this is a violation of the rules. So hopefully it won't end up with their dismissal if they're just accepting it because it's being pushed on them by the resident. But at the same time, they have got to realize, no, this is unacceptable behavior and it sets a very bad precedent for the rest of the facility.
So if you haven't witnessed that specifically, but you've heard that that's happening, is that still okay to report?
Oh, it is. Absolutely is okay to report. And I would go to the ombudsman representative at the assisted living facility, and then together with the ombudsman, go to the administrator and make it clear, I have not seen this personally, but I've heard that it's happening. And so I just feel that you should know.
Great. Well, everyone, Paul has very kindly provided all of his contact information, so please reach out to him with any additional questions that you may have. Paul, thank you so much. This was so helpful. And what's going to happen now is when you registered for this event, you signed up for a specific class, so you should be placed automatically into those classes in just a moment. If you hadn't selected a specific course, a box will pop up and you'll be able to choose which room you want to go into. And so with that, it is 11 o'clock and I will allow for Rob, who is our tech guru here, to place us all in those correct rooms. Paul, again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.